So guys, over the weekend, we heard the tragic news where two men were shot dead at a bar in Spain, and they were among Scotland's most high-profile underworld figures. Ross Monaghan is 43 and Eddie Lyons Jr. is 46. Both major players in the Lyons crime clan were killed at Monaghan's bar in Fuengirola in Andalusia. They have been involved in a bloody rivalry with the Daniel group dating back to more than 20 years. Since March, both gangs have been linked to what's thought to be a fresh feud with a series of assaults, shootings and firebombings across Glasgow and Edinburgh. Spanish detectives are yet to confirm if the double murder on the Costa is connected to the recent violence, which has resulted in more than 30 arrests. Guys, before I begin this video, if you can, please subscribe to the channel. Please give this video a little like and share it with all. I'd really appreciate it. So for more than a quarter of a century, the people of Glasgow, more recently Edinburgh, and even in the Costa del Sol, have lived under the shadow of a war. It is not fought by nations or political factions, but by two deeply entrenched criminal empires, the Daniel and Lyons gangs. The feud, which began as a dispute over stolen drugs, has evolved into the sprawling transnational battle. Its victims have included drug dealers, innocent bystanders, women and children, and its architects have built international connections, aligned with powerful cartels and harnessed everything from social media propaganda to military-grade weapons in a desperate and ongoing power struggle. Now, following a brazen double shooting in Spain, investigators fear the conflict is entering its most dangerous phase yet. So, it was just after 10 PM on a warm Saturday evening when gunfire rang out on the Costa del Sol. Inside a dimly lit Irish pub nestled among the expat bars of southern Spain, two men were gunned down at close range, one of them Ross Monaghan, a named long associate with the Lyons crime syndicate. To locals, the shooting was shocking, but to those familiar with Scotland's gangland underworld, it felt like a grim continuation of a feud that had already left dozens dead, injured or disappeared. Monaghan, now in his late 40s, was no stranger to violence. He was once tried for the murder of Gerbil Carroll, a feared enforcer for the rival Daniel clan, who was executed in 2010 in a supermarket car park. Though Monaghan was acquitted, the shooting was seen as a symbolic blow against the Daniels, but the war didn't end there. In fact, it only grew darker, more intricate and more international. So, let's go into Ross Monaghan. So he first hit the headlines when he was arrested as a suspect, as I said, for the supermarket shooting. At the time, Carroll had been responsible for a series of so-called alien abductions across central Scotland. The kidnappings were described in such a way as the victims, who were tortured and robbed, told police they couldn't remember anything about their ordeal. On the 13th of January 2010, Carroll attended a lunchtime business meeting at an Asda. The enforcer met a drug pusher, Stephen Glenn, who was linked to the Lyons family. A trial later heard Carroll told him, "You're working for me now. Anybody that doesn't fall into line is going to get banged." But minutes after delivering the ultimatum, he was sitting in the back of a black Audi A3 when a speeding Volkswagen Golf screeched to a halt in front of the vehicle. Carroll's two associates fled, leaving him trapped in the back of the three-door car. Two masked men emerged from the Golf and opened fire, shattering the rear passenger windows. Carroll was shot in the head and chest 13 times in total in an attack that lasted 25 seconds. Despite being arguably the most public gunman hit ever carried out in Scotland, the Police Scotland investigation was initially met with a wall of silence. But in August 2010, Monaghan was arrested just 10 days before his partner gave birth to their daughter. He spent 6 months on remand, only to be acquitted of the murder in May 2012 after a judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to convict him. At the time, Monaghan said, "It's been a nightmare. I'm glad to get this over. I've always said it's got nothing to do with me." And with regards to the murder of Gerbil Carroll, there was a man who was jailed for life after being convicted of murdering him. That man goes by the name of William Patterson. He had denied shooting the 29-year-old dead at the Asda car park. He claimed he was elsewhere at the time and incriminated 6 other people. Patterson, however, was convicted of murder following a 2-week trial at the High Court in Glasgow back in 2015, and he was told he must serve a minimum of 22 years in jail. Judge Lord Armstrong told Patterson, on the evidence this court has heard, this murder appears to have been premeditated, planned, carried out by you and others in the most calculated way. It was not a spontaneous event which happened on the spur of the moment. It was in effect an execution. The judge said Carroll was murdered in the most vicious and brutal way. He added that it was carried out in a public car park where ordinary members of the public were going about their everyday business and put at risk of gunfire. As I said, the court heard that the shooting was carried out by 2 masked gunmen in the supermarket car park in front of shocked shoppers. It's not known if Patterson was one of the gunmen or driving the Volkswagen Golf that was driven away from the Asda to Coatbridge, where the weapons were dumped in plastic bags and shrubbery behind a library. So in order to understand how this war began between the two factions, we've got to return to the grim council estates of North Glasgow in the late 90s. In Postle Park, a neighbourhood scarred by poverty and crime, Jamie Daniel began rising through the ranks of Glasgow's criminal elite. Former scrap metal dealer Daniel combined street-smart brutality with a shrewd understanding of the city's underworld economy. By the mid-2000s, he was estimated to be worth around £9 million, running a network of drug distribution and money laundering operations in Scotland. Just a few miles north, in Milton, another empire was emerging. Eddie Lyons Sr., a savvy but ruthless operator, seized control of a local community centre. But beneath the facade of the neighbourhood outreach lay a thriving criminal network. Lyons Group, dubbed the Club Boys, began expanding into drug dealing, extortion and armed trafficking. His sons Eddie Jr. and Stephen would be key lieutenants. It was long before the two criminal destinies collided. The spark, according to insiders, was a missing haul of drugs in 2001. But the feud rapidly became more about money. It became deeply personal. Tit-for-tat incidents had basically been happening over several years. The violence exploded in 2006 with an attack that stunned the nation. Gunmen stormed Applerow Motors in Lamhill, where several members of the Lyons gang had gathered. Michael Lyons, who was just 21, was shot dead. Stephen Lyons took bullets to the leg and back but survived. And Robert Pickett, another associate, was left in a coma and later lost a kidney. The attack was a part of an elite enforcement group loyal to the Daniels known as the Untouchables. They operated with military precision, masked, armed and seemingly fearless. Several of them were later caught and sentenced to record jail terms, but the bloodshed didn't end there. So the 2 masked gunmen who were part of this untouchable gang were each jailed for 35 years. So they went by the names of Raymond Anderson and James MacDonald, and they basically armed themselves with handguns to blast the 21-year-old Michael Lyons to death at the Applerow Motors MOT Centre. As I said, they also left the victim's cousin, Stephen Lyons, and his friend, Robert Pickett, badly injured. So Anderson and his right-hand man, MacDonald, was snared after police carried out surveillance, traced phone calls and even bugged cars the pair drove to eavesdrop into hundreds of hours of their conversations. The pair denied charges of murder and attempted murder during a long-running trial at the High Court in Glasgow, and they also denied being linked to a cache of military weapons, including machine guns and ammunition that had been stolen from an army barracks. But the jury returned guilty verdicts against both after 2 days of deliberations. The 35-year sentence delivered by Lord Hardy was believed to be the biggest ever handed out in Scottish courts. He branded the shooting cold-blooded, premeditated execution. The attack happened at the garage owned by David Lyons, the uncle of the 2 victims, and he told how he saw the hitman wearing old men masks and dark clothes coming up to his premises. He said he and Michael sprinted inside the garage, pursued by one of the gunmen who was firing at Michael. Stephen Lyons and Robert Pickett escaped in their car, chased by the second gunman. Mr. Lyons described how he heard Michael's screams and then saw him fall to the ground. He added, "I went to pick Michael up, but I saw the gun still pointing at us." Asked by the prosecutor what his reaction was, he said, "I had to run." He told how he saw Stephen's car flying past him and crash into a fence. At the same time, he almost bumped into the second gunman, who was chasing the car and still firing at it. Eventually, when the gunman ran away, Lyons said he went back to Michael. He said there was no colour in him. Looking at him, I'm sure he was dead. That same year, Eddie Jr. survived an ambush orchestrated by Kevin Gerbil Carroll, who by then had earned a fearsome reputation as Jamie Daniels' most volatile enforcer. As we heard, Carroll's own demise would come 4 years later in one of the most brazen killings of the conflict, a daytime execution outside the Asda supermarket. Though Monaghan was cleared of the murder, William Buff Patterson, as I said, was the person that was sentenced, turning himself in whilst on the run in Spain. So, as Scotland's law enforcement agencies began clamping down on the gang activity, both factions adapted. They shifted from chaotic street violence to organised, sophisticated networks. Stephen Lyons, having survived multiple attempts on his life, relocated to Dubai, where he forged an alliance with the Kinahans. This partnership gave Lyons unprecedented access to drug routes, weapons and international safe havens. For a time they appeared to have had the upper hand, and several Daniel enforcers were jailed. Jamie Daniel himself died of cancer in 2016, leaving the gang structure temporarily weakened. But the Daniels too involved. They aligned themselves with Mark Richardson, a convicted drug dealer who established a powerful base of operations in Edinburgh. And by the late 2010s, Scotland's gangland map had been redrawn, no longer a Glasgow exclusive war, but a battle with tentacles stretching across the UK and beyond. However, early this year, the uneasy quiet shattered. A coke deal in Edinburgh, supposedly worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, went catastrophically wrong. Ross Miami McGill, a volatile former football hooligan, had supplied a large consignment, but when his associate went to collect payment, they were handed counterfeit banknotes, allegedly by an individual connected to Mark Richardson. Humiliated and furious, McGill, who's believed to be in Dubai, ordered immediate retaliation. Firebombs, drive-by shootings and home invasions began erupting across Edinburgh. Businesses and homes connected to the Daniels and Richardsons were torched. Even a 72-year-old woman and a 12-year-old child were attacked. One of the most high-profile victims was a businessman, and he was slashed with a machete and left bleeding in a hallway. So with much of the violence was physical, the feud has also moved online. McGill's faction began operating under the name Tamo Junto, Portuguese for We Are Together, a nod to the group's international ties and its digital-first strategy. TMJ launched a coordinated social media campaign sharing videos of the attacks, issuing warnings and posting taunting messages to rivals. In one video posted days before the Costa shootings, a mass figure declared, "TMJ will continue to target anyone associated with the Damned family or Mark Richardson. There will never be truce between TMJ and the Gremlins." So the Gremlins is a nickname for Daniels. And basically these messages, these threats, these coded warnings have crisscrossed encrypted platforms, turning a decades-long turf war into a cyber psychological battle that's increasingly drawn in younger recruits. And now we're at a point where two more men, Eddie Lyons Jr. and Ross Monaghan, were shot dead at a bar in Spain. And it seems as though that this war on the streets of Scotland will never end.